Ida the Spidah, written by Deirdre Moynihan, illustrated by Ben Leary. One day, Andrew and his little brother Harrison were playing. Now they were very, very good boys. Most of the time, they cleaned up their toys after they were all done playing with them. But one day, they played and played and played until every toy was out of the toy box. The room looked like a tornado had hit. They could not even see the rug anymore. Suddenly, they heard footsteps. It was their mother. When Mommy came into the room, she stopped. She did a little scream. "Oh, my goodness!" she said. "What a mess! I cannot even walk through this room. And Grandpa John is coming over in an hour. Boys, you must clean this up right away." And then she carried Sadie, their dog, over all the toys and their mess, and they went to put the dog outside. Andrew and Harrison looked around. They were alone now with all their toys. They could not figure out how to begin cleaning up. Everywhere they looked, the floor was covered with toys. Andrew sighed and picked up the first toy. And that's when he saw the spider. "Mom! A spider! Come get it!" Andrew yelled. Harrison just stared at the spider. Mommy did not come. Andrew thought that maybe Mommy did not understand him, so he yelled again. This time, he said the word spider like Grandpa John said it. Spidah. They lived in Massachusetts. "Mommy! A spider!" Still, Mommy did not come. The reason she did not come was that she could not hear the boys calling her. She was putting the dog out. They would have to take care of the spider by themselves. Harrison picked up one of the biggest books they had and handed it to Andrew. Andrew lifted it up over his head to slam it down on the spider, when suddenly he stopped. He looked very closely at the spider. He had never seen a spider that looked like this. He looked closer, and then even closer. This spider was afraid. As Andrew lifted the book up in the air again, he saw the spider scramble into the corner. She turned around and faced Andrew and Harrison. This time, both brothers looked closely. They could not believe what they saw. The spider had a huge tear rolling down one cheek. Her little arms were covering her body and face to protect herself. She was shaking and had her eyes squinched together tightly. After a minute, the spider opened her eyes. She looked back and forth between the two boys. Then she closed her eyes again, and her mouth opened wide, very wide. A long, sad squeak filled the room. The spider was crying. The boys looked at each other. They had never seen such a thing. Harrison took his binky out of his mouth and offered it to the spider. The spider ignored the binky and kept crying. Andrew quickly dashed across the room to where he'd left his plate of cookies and milk. He took a large crumb of cookie and dipped it into the milk. He ran back to the spider and placed the huge, soggy cookie crumb directly in front of her. The smell of the yummy cookie drifted up to her nose. Her eyes popped open. The crying stopped instantly. One of the spider's arms slowly reached out and nervously scraped the wet cookie crumb. Then, keeping her eyes on the boys, she tasted the crumb. Then another arm reached out and scraped it, and another scraping it all into her mouth. Faster and faster this went until within seconds the entire crumb was gone. The spider was so thankful to the boys. They had not crushed her. They had given her cookies and milk. How could she thank them? If only she could talk. She reached out and tried to pat Harrison's toe, but her gentle, spidery touch tickled him so much that he fell over giggling. She tried to hug Andrew, but she could not even reach her little arms around one of his fingers. How was she going to say thank you to the boys? She tried to think. Meanwhile, Andrew clapped his hands together and yelled, "Let's name the spider!" The boys could not think of a name, though. Then he thought of Grandpa John and how he said Spidah. Then he thought about how his cousin's name rhymed with Spidah, because his cousin's name was Ida. So he named her Ida the Spidah. Suddenly, a loud yell came in from the door from outside. "Boys, I hope you are cleaning up that playroom." A look of panic came across the faces of the two brothers as they remembered that they were supposed to be cleaning up their toys. "Oh no! What are we going to do? We have to clean this whole room in less than 1 hour? That's impossible!" said Andrew. Harrison just looked at him. His eyes got wider and he sucked on his binky faster and faster. Then, from out of nowhere, an idea popped into the head of Ida the Spidah. She knew the perfect way to thank the boys. She would get someone to help them clean their room, and she knew just the right one for the job. She leapt up onto the nearest toy and whistled. Not just a normal whistle, but a special spider whistle, which is so high-pitched that no human could ever hear it. The boys could not hear the whistle, but what they saw next, they would never forget. A huge shadow came over the room. The boys looked up. From the light on the ceiling came the largest spider the boys had ever seen. As it dropped down by a strand of web, lower and lower, they stared. Harrison's mouth fell open. His binky fell on the floor. At the same time, the spider landed on the floor. The enormous spider looked like it was gliding as it crawled across the floor, over to Ida the Spidah. Ida introduced him to the boys. "Boys, this is Max-Stache." Max-Stache suddenly smiled and with 2 hands brushed his mustache. He then tilted back his head and rose up till he was standing on only 2 legs. He flexed each one of his arms. Muscles were bulging everywhere. He was a very hefty spider. Without warning, one of his arms reached out. The boys backed up, scared. But the arm slid underneath Andrew's toy tractor. He hoisted it easily up onto his back. All of his arms grabbed it and moved it up and down, showing off how strong he was. His muscles gleamed and bulged. He crawled to the top of the toy box. He then put the tractor straight into the toy box. Then he began going around the room and grabbing every size and type of ball there was in the room. He began throwing them into the toy box from wherever he was in the room, as if he was throwing a football. Soon, other toys besides balls were being thrown in the same way. Max-Stache looked at the train track going around the room. It was filled with toys and dust. He paused, looked at the boys, and pointed to his abdomen. An abdomen is the bottom part of your tummy. Suddenly, he flexed all his muscles, looked at his own stomach, and then looked at the boys, smiling. He was showing off his tummy muscles. Then he fluffed up all the fuzz on his belly. Some spiders are hairy-looking. He then did an enormous belly flop onto the train track. He began moving just the ends of his legs so that his tummy was being pulled along the train track. All the poofy hairs on his tummy did a fabulous job dusting the track. In less than 1 minute, he was done with the entire track. He leapt off the track and, without pausing, did a pose that looked straight out of the Spider-Man movie, Andrew thought. Out of his wrist shot a line of spiderweb that zoomed straight up into the corner of the room. With a push of his back legs, Max-Stache was shooting right up into that corner. Andrew thought he could see Max's mustache being ruffled by the wind. That's how fast he was going. Up in the corner, Max-Stache looked down on the room. Lying amongst the toys were dozens of puzzle pieces. So fast that the boys could barely see it, Max shot out his line and pulled each puzzle piece up to himself. He stacked them up on all of his hands as if he were a waiter in a restaurant. When his arms could hold no more, he ziplined down to where the puzzle lay and used his 8 arms to replace the puzzle pieces back into the puzzle where they belonged. Next to the puzzle was a red race car. He crawled inside the open window and started up the car. He revved the engine louder and louder. Andrew and Harrison were amazed. They had never heard their cars make engine noises before. That is because spiders can do things that humans cannot do. Without warning, the car's front end lifted up and the car started flying so fast across the room that the fur on the spider was wiggling. Straight into the toy garage it went. Max-Stache parked that car and the 8 others, all in a perfect row, in less than 3 minutes. Max-Stache never stopped moving, and before you know it, the entire room was clean and spotless. Ida the Spidah cleaned up little crumbs behind him and shined the cars with her Spidah spit. From the other room, there was a large bang as the door slammed. Mom was returning from letting out the dog. She took 3 hurrying steps into the room holding Sadie the dog, then saw the room. She stopped in her tracks and gasped. Her hands flew up in the air, dropping Sadie, who luckily landed on her feet. "Oh my goodness, boys! How did you do such a good job?" The boys stood silently in front of the toy fire station, their hands folded and smiles on their faces. "I really can't believe this! I have never seen little boys clean a room so well in my entire life. And so quickly! Wow! I am going to tell Grandpa John what a great job you did, and he and Daddy will be so proud of you. Thank you, boys!" She picked up Sadie and left the room, humming happily. The boys looked at each other and giggled. They both kneeled down and looked into the fire station window. Andrew and Harrison had made the spiders each a little bed, and the spiders had fallen fast asleep. The end.